All right, today we're going to talk about what are the so-called facts regarding coronavirus. Okay, so let's begin by looking up the definition of fact. All right, we're going to merriam-webster.com. The word fact is a noun. Okay, definition 1A, something that has actual existence. 1B, an actual occurrence. 2, a reality of information presented as having objective reality. 3, the quality of being actual. 4, a thing done. Okay? And number 5 is in truth. All right, so we're going to check out these videos on what they're claiming to be the facts surrounding coronavirus. Okay, so we're going to look up what we know about coronavirus. All right, and we'll search for that. Okay, now we're going to look for a video regarding what should address what the facts are that are being told about the coronavirus, COVID-19 to be specific. All right, so let's see. Let's go to this one right here from 2 weeks ago by DW News. It is titled, "What Happens When You're Infected with the COVID-19 Coronavirus?" Let's check it out.
The vast majority of patients with the new coronavirus recover successfully without needing serious medical attention. So how many people recover and what helps? The WHO estimates at least 80% of COVID-19 patients have mild cases of the illness. In these cases, hospitalization is likely unnecessary, and the virus feels more like a cold than a deadly disease. Symptoms include fatigue, light fever, and a dry cough.
Okay, so they say the symptoms include fatigue, dry cough, and let's go back and just check one more time what they said.
Hospitalization is likely unnecessary, and the virus feels more like a cold than a deadly disease. Symptoms include fatigue, light fever, and a dry cough.
Okay, so fatigue, light fever, and dry cough. Very vague symptoms that could cover many variations of the common cold. So let's continue.
Even in more serious coronavirus infections, most cases are not fatal. Officials are still working to determine the true mortality rate. Current data suggests it could be around 3%, but many experts stress the data is still very incomplete. The true mortality rate could be under 1%. That's much lower than some early estimates that were as high as 5%.
Okay, so 2 weeks ago, when this video was released, they believed that the mortality rate could be as high as 3%. Previous to that, they believed it could be as high as 5%. And now they're saying it could be as low as 1%. Okay, so pay attention how the so-called facts are consistently changing. A fact, as we read earlier, is something, it's in reality, it's truth. It's an actual occurrence. So it's not facts if you're not even sure what the mortality rate is. Let's continue.
There is no cure yet for the new coronavirus, but there are some general...
All right, so there's what will be considered another fact that they're claiming. There is no cure for this coronavirus.
recommendations for recovery. Get lots of rest, make sure to drink fluids. Painkillers and cough medication can help relieve symptoms. But don't take antibiotics, they won't help. It's still unclear whether existing antiviral medications could be effective. Scientists are trying to figure that out. So, let's say you've recovered. Does that mean you're immune from getting the new coronavirus again? Unfortunately, that might not be the case. There have been isolated cases of patients testing positive again after seeming to recover.
All right. they said it's isolated incidents where people have been so-called cured of the coronavirus, or they purged the virus, yet it comes back again. Now, I don't know where the evidence to back that claim is coming from, but these are the claims they're making. So we have to pay attention and ask, are these facts or are they speculation?
But how should we interpret those results? Doctors say it could mean one of several things. The coronavirus might lie dormant in patients before causing symptoms again. Or testing irregularities might have just made it seem like the virus was gone when it wasn't. As with many aspects of this new ailment, the definite answer is not in yet. But one thing's clear: reports of reinfection are very rare thus far.
Alright, so let's check out another video regarding what's being put forth as a fact regarding coronavirus. We're going to look at something more recent. Like I said, that was a video uploaded 2 weeks ago. So let's try to find something within the last week. Okay? Here's a video titled, "The Coronavirus Did Not Escape from a Lab. Here's How We Know." This is by Live Science.
One persistent myth is that this virus called SARS-CoV-2 was made by scientists and escaped from a lab in Wuhan, China. A new analysis of SARS-CoV-2 may finally put that myth to bed. A group of researchers compared the genome of this novel coronavirus with the 7 other coronaviruses known to infect humans: SARS, MERS, SARS-CoV-2, HKU1, NL6.
Okay, here's a list of what are considered the known coronaviruses: SARS, MERS, SARS-CoV-2, HKU, NL63, OC43229E. So, up to this point, one of their facts is that they knew of 7 other coronaviruses.
3, OC43, and 229E. Their analyses clearly shows that SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposefully manipulated virus. A study at Scripps Research looked at the genetic template for the spike proteins that protrude from the surface of the virus. The coronavirus uses these spikes to grab the outer walls of its host cells and then enter those cells. They specifically looked at the gene sequence responsible for 2 key features of these spike proteins: the grabber, called the receptor binding domain, hooks onto the host cells, and the so-called cleavage site that allows the virus to open and enter those cells. That analysis showed that the hook part of the spike had evolved to target a receptor on the outside of human cells. It is so effective that the researchers said that the spike proteins were the result of natural selection and not genetic engineering.
Okay. What they said is that the product of this novel coronavirus attaching itself to the cell wall, it can only occur from natural selection and not by something created in a laboratory. So what we're going to go do is look at the definition of natural selection to understand what message is being conveyed. All right, so we'll go up here and we will look up natural selection definition. All right, this is a good way to research. You can use whatever search engine you choose. What we're trying to do is find out what the information is that's being presented, and if that is an actual fact or if it's based on something else. So, once again, we look up natural selection on Merriam-Webster.com. All right, the definition of natural selection: a natural process that results in the survival and reproductive success of individuals or groups best adjusted to their environment, and that leads to the perpetuation of genetic qualities best suited to that particular environment. But is there any evidence that an organism created in a lab could not function in the same manner as a organism that developed through quote unquote natural selection? There's many things that come out the lab that function and mimic organisms and chemical processes that evolve and react in life, natural life, nature. All right, so let's go back and continue this video.
SARS-CoV-2 is very closely related to the virus that causes severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS, which fanned across the globe nearly 20 years ago. Scientists have studied how SARS-CoV differs from SARS-CoV-2 with several key letter changes in the genetic code. Yet in computer simulations, the mutations in SARS-CoV-2 don't seem to work well at helping the virus bind to human cells. If scientists had deliberately engineered this virus, they wouldn't have chosen mutations that computer models suggest won't work. But it turns out, nature is smarter than scientists, and the novel coronavirus found a way to mutate that was better and completely different from anything scientists could have created. Also,
another thing I would like to bring up is now that artificial intelligence is being used, you don't have to imagine that this is relegated by the expansion of the mind of a chemist or a lab worker. There are AI programs that can synthesize the information at super high levels, especially supercomputers that can operate at quantum levels, quantum speeds. And this information can most likely be worked out using these high technological systems that they have developed. So keep that in mind.
the overall molecular structure of this virus is distinct from the known coronaviruses, and instead most closely resembles viruses found in bats and pangolins that had never been known to cause humans any harm. If someone was trying to create a new coronavirus as a pathogen, they would have created it from a virus known to affect humans. The research group came up with two possible scenarios for the origin of SARS-CoV-2 in humans. The first scenario is that we contracted the virus directly from an animal. In the case of
here we go again. Let's go back and see exactly what it's saying. All right.
The research group came up with two possible scenarios for the origin of SARS-CoV-2 in humans.
They came up with two possible scenarios for the origin of this coronavirus. When we looked earlier, we saw that the definition of fact was an actual occurrence. Did these two possible scenarios happen to be the two occurrences that took place? I don't think so. So what are we being told right now? Is this facts or is this speculation?
The first scenario is that we contracted the virus directly from an animal. In the case of SARS-CoV-2, the researchers suggest that animal was a bat, which transmitted the virus to another intermediate animal, possibly a pangolin. That brought the virus to humans. The new coronavirus's pathogenic abilities were effective at infecting human cells and would have been in place before hopping to humans. The second scenario would be that the virus we contracted from an animal had pathogenic features that evolved after the virus jumped from animal to human host. Some coronaviruses that originated in pangolins have a hook structure similar to that of SARS-CoV-2. In that way, a pangolin either directly or indirectly passed its virus onto a human host. Then, once inside a human host, the virus could have evolved to easily break into human cells. Once it developed that capacity, the coronavirus would be even more capable of spreading between people. All of this technical detail could help scientists forecast the future of this pandemic. If the virus did enter humans in a pathogenic form, that raises the probability of future outbreaks. The virus could still be circulating in the animal population and might again jump to humans, ready to cause another outbreak. But the chances of...
It's important to understand that right now, this spread of virus is very speculative. It's all speculative, and it's hard to get real factual data. It's a lot of reactionary, emotional responses taking place.
Such future outbreaks are low if the virus must first enter the human population and then evolve the pathogenic property.
All right. So let's go back. We're going to check out one more video. And we're going to try to find a video what we're going to do is try to find a video as recent as today. Do a little bit of up-to-date current news. All right. Let's try to find a good video here. All right, we're going to check out this video posted by CNN. It's called Coronavirus Curve. U.S. cases on track to overtake Italy. Let's check it out.
Let's take a look at the curve now, because all around the world, people are looking at their own country, sometimes at their own city, and how the rate of infection is progressing. Joining us now is John Byrne Murdoch. He's a data visualization journalist for the Financial Times. John, thanks for joining us. So which country currently is seeing the most alarming rise, the steepest curve, if you will, and why?
All right. New terms are also being used by the mainstream media. One of those terms are the curve, which has to do with the rate or the rise in cases of coronavirus in a particular area. And they're talking about how do we flatten the curve? And the solution most of the time that comes back is quarantine people, self-isolate, social distance, stay in your home. These are the messages that you hear. Regardless of where this came from, these are the messages that you're being told at this time. And you have to realize that that is a violation of our rights of freedom to movement, freedom of our own bodies. Let's continue.
Well, so thanks for having me on. I think there's two ways of answering that question that give slightly different answers. If we look at the number of cases, the US is still the most alarming situation there. We've got more and more cases coming in every day across the US. And obviously part of that is because of the ramping up of the testing regime there. So more tests being carried out will obviously lead to more positive tests. So that's why one of the things we look at as well as cases is deaths. And that gives a slightly different picture. So right now, probably the most concerning part of the world is Spain, where we're seeing more deaths at this stage of Spain's outbreak than we've seen in Italy, in Wuhan, in anywhere else. So Spain very much looks like it could become the next epicenter, but also there's concerning evidence that the US death curve is actually starting to bend upwards, starting to get steeper. So over the first couple of weeks of the outbreak in the US, things were relatively slow, but we're seeing more and more deaths come in every 24 hours in the US at the moment. And of course, we've now seen that cross above 1,000. So alarming scenes in America as well.
Okay, so they're making the claim that the rate of deaths in the US at this time, this is March 26, 2020. They're saying on this day, the deaths are continuing to rise more from what they've seen in the previous days, the previous weeks. It's going up. And as he mentioned in the beginning, a lot of it comes from people, more and more people being tested. So simply from more and more people being tested, you're going to get higher rates. So let's continue.
What impact, I mean, if you look at countries that have implemented strict containment measures, like Italy and now Spain, what impact are they having on the progression, on the trajectory of these curves? Because there's some disappointment in France, for instance, as well, where you have these pretty strict containment measures in place, but the curve is not flattening as quickly as authorities would want. Do we understand what the impact of containment is on the data?
Sure. So I think the first thing we need to note there is that it takes quite a while for the impact of a lockdown to actually come into the numbers that we're seeing, especially when it comes to deaths. So when you consider how long it takes to go from someone picking up an infection to becoming seriously ill and then in tragic cases dying, that can often be 2 weeks or more. So we wouldn't expect to see the impact of a lockdown on mortality numbers for around 2 weeks. Now in China, which locked down Wuhan way back in late January, that's the sort of time period we seem to be looking at, somewhere between 10 days and 2 to 3 weeks in terms of the mortality curve starting to flatten off. Now, France is obviously we're not as far into that period. We're about 8 or 9 days into France's lockdown. We're coming up to we're about 2 weeks into Italy's lockdown. So we would now perhaps start to expect Italy's mortality curve to be coming down. And in terms of new numbers of deaths overnight, that is what we're seeing. Those numbers seem to have peaked 3 or 4 days ago. So there is evidence that after these hard lockdowns come into place, 2 or 3 weeks later, we start seeing the curve flatten.
All right. So on March 26, 2020, when CNN uploaded this video, they're saying within the next 2 to 3 weeks, as you see the data coming in from the majorities who are taking these tests, they should be able to understand if mass lockdowns are making a difference or not. Okay, so that means by mid-April, they should be able to tell people exactly if the lockdowns are bringing down the rates or not. If they're not bringing down the rates, you as an individual, not a citizen of a collective state or a collective United States, so-called, you have to be able to look at information and make the best decisions for your own life. Let's continue.
Okay, and that's actually very encouraging. The fact that if you just follow the orders, and in some cases the mandatory self-isolation orders coming from authorities, that will contribute to flattening the curve. What about city by city?
All right, we're going to listen to that one more time.
The orders, and in some cases the mandatory self-isolation orders coming from authorities, that will contribute to flattening the curve. What about city?
All right, so we're going to end it there. Basically, just wanted to go over what